Do you know when you found the right house? The house that you love, the house that will love you back. I think so. I think you know it almost immediately. It sounds like I believe in fairies and trolls, not just the Swedish one I'm married to, but I believe it's actually true. In the previous episode, we showed you 5 of the contenders in our house hunt. The last house I'm going to show you, and the one that we bought, felt like meeting an old friend. A good friend. Someone that will look after you when you sleep alone on dark, creaky, windy autumn nights, when it's you and the house against the world. For our last viewing, we arrived in the village of Voroyac, which is exactly between the 2 towns of Angoulême, with its direct high-speed train link to Paris, and Cognac, the capital of the region, with about 15 minutes drive to each town. Cognac and Angoulême are a little different. Cognac is very quaint, stunningly beautiful, and rammed with museums, the Les Halles food market, swanky pedestrian shopping streets, and some of the largest cognac houses, including Hennessy, Rémy Martin, and Mieuxcow. Angoulême, on the other hand, is effective and hard-working. In some ways modern, in other ways old, with beautiful old ramparts and food market, as well as a young bustling student town. It is also the capital of comic book creation, boasting a comic book museum and art schools. Gaston himself is leisurely laying on top of the train station. The day we drove into the village, along the stunning valley that leads into Voroyac, for our first viewing of the Logis de Baku, there were a lot of question marks. Even though we had studied the cadastral maps in great detail, it was unclear where exactly the borders were and which parts of the land were included in the sale. By the looks of it, it came with a very generous amount of land. What we did know was that it needed a lot of repairs. The enormous roof had some enormous holes in it. Underneath those enormous holes, there were an enormous amount of buckets. We knew, to correct that, it was going to require an enormous budget. Even taking all of this into account, the 3 of us left from the first viewing with beaming smiles. Despite all that we knew we had to do, and didn't know how to do, nor how much it would cost, we all felt that this really was the one. The logis has a little bit of an odd background, as it is effectively a replacement for a burnt-down chateau that once stood just behind it on the estate. All other outbuildings, walls, courtyards, second courtyards, stables, wineries, and the pigeonniere belong to the castle that burnt down in the Revolution around 1794. The most elderly people in the village still remember seeing the rubble of the Chateau Vaux as children in the late 1920s. The chateau and its grounds were huge. As you can see from this Napoleonic map, the chateau was likely to have been about 50 meters long and 25 meters wide. Chateau Vaux was largely built by the Montalembert family, but dates back to a much earlier fortress of the 14th century. One of the most prominent members of this family, Marc René, the Marquis de Montalembert, built cannons and designed forts. The large cannon factory he founded is in nearby Reuil-sur-Touvre and is still there today, and the forts he designed, including the very famous Stralsund on the Baltic coast. As the family Montalembert were Protestants, they didn't think twice about dismantling the local Catholic village church to use the stones to build their chateau. It's probably fair to suspect that some of those stones were also used to build our house. The logis was built by the Dutch paper merchant family Van Tongeren in 1851, who used the completely enclosed chateau walls, grounds and utilities to form a cognac and tobacco estate. The new house was modern for the time, built around 4 large quadrants, equal over 4 floors, with a large hallway and stairwell in the middle of those 4 quadrants, with each of the 4 floors being around 266 square meters in outer dimensions. The layout has kitchens, library, salon and a dining room on the ground floor. Up 1 flight of stairs on the first floor, there are 6 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. The attic, when we bought it, had some rooms for servant rooms and some for drying tobacco. We knew we wanted to change this because the false ceiling height in the attic was very low and the division of rooms was odd. Going down to the cellar or cave, it again has 4 large rooms with vaulted ceilings. The cellar, however, has got one thing that is quite rare for an otherwise standard layout, as the 2 east-facing rooms have windows to the courtyard and a beautiful arched pathway underneath the stone veranda. 3 reasonably large fields were included that came to around 16,000 square meters, or exactly 4 acres. Not that much for a farm, but plenty for the grounds of a house. In addition to that, we have a tobacco drying barn that is about 50 by 8 meters long, a winery, stables, an inner cognac hall, a stone chicken coop, and 5 cognac vats. Something that we didn't know to look for, but we have since discovered, is that most of the outbuildings in the second courtyard have the gutters routed to a very large underground cistern, built some 100 years ago, with a very useful 85,000 litre capacity. Going back to the house, it is a brilliant layout. According to a highly skilled architect friend of ours, hi Carl, this layout is still much favoured to this day in modern villas. The period when the house was built is in France known as Napoleon III, or what in England would have been Victorian times. However, the layout of the logis has much more in common with an earlier period of Georgian-style houses. After completing their new house, the Van Tongerens owned the house and farm for another 58 years. It was thereafter bought by a French family who, after 4 generations of cognac and tobacco production, sold it to us. The last harvest was in the autumn of 2019. The process of buying was far from straightforward, and our fantastic estate agent Matthew Barry, even though he was very experienced, level-headed, and a wonderful man to deal with, was as confused as we were. Different estate agents had different prices listed for this house, varying in the hundreds of thousands, and the size of land included also varied. We decided to see if we could get a meeting with the owners to possibly straighten out some of the question marks. It was a very good meeting that we went into hopeful, but almost sure that this would be beyond our budget. We came out of the meeting a little shocked, with the room spinning, realizing that it was within reach. We could afford it. The land included that we guessed would be in the lower estimate ended up being in the higher estimate, at nearly 2 hectares. We left the meeting and the estate agent to clear our heads, and drove to the nearby town of Angoulême, where we sat down with small cups of coffee on the ramparts next to the Les Halles market, and looked at each other. A little scared but very excited as we realized that this could be done. So I asked my husband, "What do you think?" His answer was quick as a whip. "We like it, we want it, so just make the call." And that was that. I have not for a nanosecond of my life in these past 2 years regretted that decision. But as I've hinted at before, the house is a house, but if you're going to relocate to a French village, there is so much else that will come into play. The villagers of Aurillac have been so incredibly welcoming and inclusive of us. I sometimes suspect that maybe someone must have paid them to look after us. There is not a question we might have for the mayor that isn't usually answered personally within half an hour, and very often by him popping over to speak to us in person. Useful information with regards to the house and gardens are frequently handed out by our friendly neighbours who stop by with important things that we should know. Potentially expensive questions with regards to the old plumbing, telephone wires, electricity wiring, etc. are answered immediately by our neighbours, the previous owners, without us having to spend considerable amounts of time and money hiring professionals to figure these things out for us. On the forefront of all this fantastic support is, of course, the family we bought from. They have never missed an opportunity to drop off fresh homegrown fruit and vegetables at our door, invite us to their home or their cabin in the woods for lunch, or simply offer general DIY advice. In short, they have turned from vendors to good friends. So, what about the house? What are the actual numbers? The house, with outbuildings and a lot of walled land, and including us putting on new roofs, came to well under €500,000. We stayed one night in the house after we got the keys, and then the world was hit by COVID restrictions again. Due to those restrictions, we could not return to the house for another 7 months. Nowadays, however, we are well underway with some modifications and renovations, and we've made the choice to start from the top down. With the new roof on and the attic soon completed, the first floor is next. We are quite strict with future plans, but they are there, and we think they are feasible. I shall present them to you floor by floor, including plans for the various outbuildings and gardens in upcoming episodes. Thank you so very much for watching, and for choosing to come with me on this journey. If you've not yet seen the previous episode, the first part of the house hunting, there will be a link to it at the end, so you can perhaps go back and watch it, as well as a link to the tours of the interior of this house, which is more or less how we bought it, apart from the roof and attic, which had been completely rebuilt. So thanks again for watching, and see you soon in a future episode. Bye bye for now.